When I pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped. Strangers were carrying furniture through the front door of my uncle's house. A moving truck blocked the mailbox, kids were running across the lawn, and a bold red "sold" sign stood right where my uncle's rose bushes used to be. I slammed the car door and shouted, "What are you doing in my house?" The man with the clipboard didn't even flinch. "Your house, we bought it 3 weeks ago," he said. "Bought it? That was impossible. I never listed it. I never signed a single paper." Then she appeared, Addison Young, the HOA president, dressed in her trademark pastel suit and smug smile. She claimed she had authority to sell abandoned homes under HOA law. But there's one problem: my uncle's property was built in 1965, decades before her HOA ever existed. She thought I'd just walk away. She had no idea who she was dealing with, because buried in my uncle's old files were documents that would tear her empire apart. Before we dive in, comment your city and local time and hit subscribe, because this HOA story is about to get unbelievable. I still remember the smell of my uncle's house, pine wood floors, old books, and the faint aroma of pipe tobacco that somehow lingered even years after he quit smoking. My Uncle Raymond Brown wasn't just my uncle, he was my father in every way that mattered. When I lost my parents in a car accident at 12, he took me in without hesitation. He raised me in that very house, the same one I now stood outside of watching strangers move in like they owned the place. Back then, Uncle Ray used to tell me, "This house has bones, Will. Real homes are built to last, not like those cookie-cutter boxes the HOA loves so much." He said it with that half-smile of his, always halfway between humor and warning. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. Now, standing in the chaos of a stolen home, I understood everything. Uncle Ray's property sat on a peaceful 3-acre corner lot, just outside of Maple Ridge. The land sloped gently down toward a line of oak trees, and the house itself was a 1,965 craftsman masterpiece, big windows, wrap-around porch, hand-carved beams. It was the kind of place you couldn't build anymore, not with today's codes and committees. He maintained it himself, right down to the copper gutters he polished twice a year. The place was entirely paid off, and it carried not just financial value, but emotional weight, decades of laughter, holidays, and memories. When he passed away at 82, it wasn't sudden. He went peacefully the way he lived. He left everything to me: his house, his savings, even his old woodworking tools. His will was straightforward and notarized by the same lawyer he'd used for 30 years. There was no confusion, no loose ends. It was, as the probate attorney put it, the cleanest inheritance case I've seen all year. After his funeral, I began the legal process. 4 months of paperwork, phone calls, and verification later, the deed was officially transferred into my name. The county recognized me as the sole owner of 342 Maple Ridge Drive. No liens, no debts, no shared ownership. Completely mine. I can still remember holding that deed in my hands, feeling a mix of sadness and pride. My wife Sarah placed her hand over mine and whispered, "He'd be proud of you." Our 2 kids, Ethan and Lily, jumped around the room already planning which bedrooms would be theirs. For the first time in years, life felt like it was moving forward. We'd been renting a small 2-bedroom apartment in the city, and the thought of fresh air, wide space, and freedom made me feel alive again. But Uncle Ray had always been cautious. A few weeks before his passing, he'd mentioned something odd to me during our last porch talk. "Will," he said quietly, "if you ever move in here, keep your guard up. There's a woman down the road runs the homeowners association, always trying to rope me in. Claims my land belongs under her rules. Don't believe a word of it." I'd laughed at the time, thinking it was just an old man's annoyance with bureaucrats. "Uncle Ray, you don't even live in their subdivision," he chuckled. "That's what I said. But they like to pretend otherwise. Watch out for her. She's the kind that smiles while she's sharpening the knife." I didn't realize then that he was talking about Addison Young. After the probate process ended, I did my due diligence. I reviewed every document Uncle Ray had filed. The original deed, dated July 1965, clearly stated that the property predated the Maple Ridge development by over 30 years. It was outside the HOA boundary lines, explicitly exempt from all covenants, conditions, and restrictions. He'd even filed an addendum in 1988, reaffirming that exemption when the Maple Ridge HOA tried to annex nearby properties. That meant one thing: my property was legally untouchable by any HOA. A few weeks before moving in, I drove down to the house to do a walkthrough. The lawn needed mowing, the porch light needed a new bulb, and there was some dust, but otherwise everything was perfect, exactly as Uncle Ray left it. I was standing by the mailbox when a silver SUV slowed down and parked beside me. A woman stepped out. Mid-50 seconds, blonde hair, pastel pink blazer, pearl necklace, every inch of her screamed suburban royalty. She smiled wide enough to make her teeth look rehearsed. "You must be the new owner," she said, walking straight up to me. "I'm Addison Young, president of the Maple Ridge Homeowners Association." Her handshake was firm, but her eyes were sharper than glass. I nodded. "Nice to meet you. But just to clarify, my property isn't part of the HOA. "Oh," she said, tilting her head like a cat playing with a mouse. "That's what your uncle used to say, too. We've been in discussions for years about voluntary integration into the community." "Voluntary?" I asked. "Yes," she replied sweetly. "But we do have certain expectations for properties within visual range of Maple Ridge." She gestured toward the street where the newer homes all looked identical beige, siding trimmed lawns and matching mailboxes. Uncle Ray's place stood out like a proud relic of the past, and apparently Addison hated that. "Well," I said, forcing a polite smile, "this house is staying the way it is. My uncle built it himself." She gave a slow nod, scribbled something in her little notebook, and said, "Of course. Just let us know your move-in timeline. We like to keep our records up to date." Something in her tone set off a small alarm in my head. Records for what? When she drove away, I stood there for a long moment, uneasy. I brushed it off, telling myself she was just nosy. After all, most HOA people were like that: too much time, too many rules. Over the next month, Sarah and I began preparing for the move. We packed, arranged for utilities, and even planned a small housewarming cookout with a few of Uncle Ray's old friends who still lived nearby. I called the county recorder's office one last time to verify ownership. Everything checked out perfectly. My name was on the deed, taxes were paid, and there were no encumbrances. The night before moving day, I drove by the house one more time. The porch light was off, the wind rustled through the trees, and everything felt calm. I remember thinking Uncle Ray were finally coming home. If only I knew what was waiting for me the next morning. When I arrived with the moving truck, the chaos hit instantly. Strange cars in the driveway, people I'd never met carrying boxes into the house, the front door wide open. My wife thought it was a mistake, that maybe the neighbors were hosting an event. But deep down, my gut told me something was terribly wrong. I grabbed my folder from the dashboard, the one with the deed title and probate paperwork. Every document proving this house was mine. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to need every last page. Because in less than 5 minutes, I'd come face to face with Addison Young again, only this time she wasn't smiling. She was standing in my doorway, clipboard in hand, acting like she owned the place. And that was the moment my quiet, ordinary life as a teacher turned into a war against the most dangerous kind of enemy, someone who believes rules don't apply to them. The morning of our move started like every hopeful chapter does, too bright, too loud, and full of boxes labeled with promises. Ethan argued that the gaming console should ride in the passenger seat for safety. Lily filmed everything on her phone for a moving day vlog, adding sparkly filters to cardboard and dust. Sarah packed sandwiches, handed me the house keys I didn't yet know were useless, and kissed my cheek like we were stepping into the life we finally deserved. I turned onto Maple Ridge Drive with the U-Haul rattling behind us, and felt the familiar dip in the road where the creek culvert settles. Beyond the bend, Uncle Ray's place came into view. The porch, the wide eaves, the old oak that leans like it's listening, my throat tightened. Then the scene resolved and something inside me froze. A moving truck, not ours, was backed into the driveway at an angle Uncle Ray would have yelled about. The garage door was open. Strangers trooped through the front door, arms wrapped around boxes that didn't belong to them. A white SUV idled along the curb with its blinkers on, doors flung open. 2 kids I didn't know sprinted across the lawn where the irises should have been sprouting. And stabbed into the front yard like a flag over conquered ground stood a red sold sign with a plastic rider that said, "Closed in 14 days. I braked so hard the seatbelt snapped me back. "No," I said aloud, as if the word could reset the image. Sarah leaned forward, eyes wide. "Will, what is this?" I pulled up, climbed out, and heard myself shout before my feet even found the grass. "Hey, stop! What are you doing in my house?" A guy in his early 40s turned from the tailgate of the truck, a clipboard in one hand and a roll of blue painter's tape in the other. He looked at me the way people look at the ocean when a storm changes direction, concerned, not intimidated. "Sir," he said, "can I help you? That's my question," I snapped. "This is my property. Why are you here?" He glanced toward the front door, then back at me. "We're moving in," he said simply. "We closed 3 weeks ago." Every word landed like a nail. "Closed," I repeated. 3 weeks ago, a woman stepped out from the entryway carrying a box labeled pantry. She had a kind face and the kind of cardigan that tries to put out fires. "Is everything okay?" she asked her husband, then looked at me. "I'm Rebecca. This is John. We're the well-new owners." I felt the edges of the world push inward. I turned, yanked open the glove compartment in the pickup, and pulled out my folder, The deed, the probate order, tax receipts, the whole fortress of paper Uncle Ray had taught me to keep. I held up the deed. No, you're not. I am. We stood on the lawn like actors who'd been given different scripts. John shifted his weight, then held up his own folder. Sir, I don't want a confrontation. We purchased this property through a legitimate sale. You should talk to your agent. My agent, I whispered the word foreign in my mouth. I never listed this house. He handed me a photocopy of a purchase contract. The header showed a brokerage I recognized from yard signs up the road. The property description matched Uncle Ray's parcel exactly. My eyes jumped to the signature page and stopped cold. My name, in my own tight slanted hand, except it wasn't mine. The forging was good, too good. Whoever did it knew my habit of dragging the downstroke of the B in brown like a tail. They'd even imitated the way I sometimes forget to dot the I in William and then impatiently add it afterward, slightly off-center. It was like looking at a version of myself I didn't remember being. A notary stamp floated beside it, clean, an official Mark A. Young Notary Public Commission expires. The date was current. Something hot flashed behind my eyes. This is fake, I said, hearing the thin edge of panic in my voice. This is not my signature. This sale is illegal. I'm sorry, Rebecca said softly, but we paid. We sold our old house. We wired the money she swallowed. We did everything right. Sarah joined me, slipping her hand into the crook of my elbow like an anchor. Ethan hovered, deciding whether to be outraged or embarrassed. Lily had stopped filming and was staring at the sold rider like it might sprout teeth. Okay, I said, forcing air into my lungs. We're calling the police. John raised his palms. We already spoke to them when we took possession. They said I don't care what they said. I snapped dialing anyway. Someone committed fraud and stole my house. The dispatcher's voice was calm in the way only people who aren't standing in your life turned crime scene can be. Officers are en route, she said. Please remain on the property and avoid confrontation. I closed the call and looked up just as a pastel shape glided into view like a shark under pale water. The silver SUV rolled to a stop at the curb and Addison Young stepped out, pearl studs, powder blue blazer, a smile that could slice. She lifted her clipboard as if hailing applause. Good morning, she sang. I see the Morrisons are getting settled. How exciting. My jaw clenched. Get off my property. Her smile didn't move. William, isn't it we met last month? I'm Addison, president of the Maple Ridge HOA. I moved toward her until the grass cushioned my steps into menace. My property is not in your HOA. She looked over my shoulder, scanning the mover's progress like a foreman. Abandoned properties within our community boundaries fall under the HOA's responsibility to protect neighborhood values, she recited. This home had accrued significant unpaid dues and violations, and the association took action after due process. I laughed, a brittle, unbelieving sound. What dues? This house predates your subdivision by decades. There is no covenant, no annexation, and no Mr. Brown, she interrupted, flipping a transparent sleeve back on her clipboard and sliding out a document. You'll find that your uncle voluntarily integrated the property in 2010. She held up a copy of a membership agreement, the Maple Ridge logo smudged in the corner like a thumbprint. Unfortunately, she continued, fees have gone unpaid for several years. The board voted to foreclose per our bylaws, and the home was sold to recoup losses. Foreclose, I stepped closer, my voice low. On a property that isn't yours, under covenants that never applied, signed by a dead man who never joined, using my forged signature. Her eyes sharpened to points. Be careful with your words. I choose them for a living, I said. I'm a teacher. Today's lesson is fraud. 2 patrol cars rolled up, lights pulsing without sirens. The officers stepped out, 2 men whose faces held that weary mix of authority and apology. We converged in the yard, me with my deed clutched like a shield, Addison with her clipboard like a baton, John and Rebecca with their lives folded into boxes behind them. All right, the older officer said. What's happening here? I presented my documents in a rush, probate order, deed, tax statements, the explicit line reading, not subject to HOA covenants. I pulled out Uncle Ray's 1,988 certified letter, refusing annexation, the green return receipt card stapled to it like a medal. This is my home, I finished, and someone forged a sale. Addison's voice turned honey thick. Officer, the HOA followed procedure. We posted notices, held hearings, he didn't respond. The property was in disrepair, a blight on the neighborhood. In disrepair, my laugh cracked. It's a 1,965 craftsman, perfectly maintained. And even if it weren't, you have no authority here. John stepped in carefully. Officers, we acted in good faith. We paid the purchase price to the brokerage. We have title insurance, a recorded deed, everything checked out. The younger officer glanced between our papers like they were written in different alphabets. He lowered his voice. Listen, he said to me, I'm not saying nothing happened. But this is shaping up like a civil dispute. We can't evict anybody right now. You'll have to talk to an attorney, get an injunction. What about the forged signature, I asked. That's a crime. He tipped his head. Then file a report at the station and take it to the DA. Right now, we're not the ones to decide ownership. Sarah's grip on my arm strengthened. Ethan muttered. This is messed up. Lily whispered. Dad Addison exhaled, as if justice had stretched its legs, and sat obediently at her feet. There you have it, she said, slipping the plastic sleeve back over her fake agreement. We all want what's best for Maple Ridge. My recommendation is that you consult counsel. I looked at the porch, where I'd learned to sand wood, to balance checkbooks, to measure twice and cut once. I looked at the oak tree with the old tire scar in the bark, at the dark square on the lawn, where Uncle Ray's grill left a rectangle of summer. My vision steadied into a tunnel, and the person at the end of it was Addison Young. You picked the wrong house, I said quietly, and the wrong family. Her smile returned thinner. Everything in this subdivision belongs to the HOA, she said, with the certainty of a person who had never been meaningfully told no. Not this, I said. Not ever. The officers exchanged looks, took our statements, and left in a drift of blue reflections. The movers went back to carrying boxes, with the deliberate shame of people who do their jobs next to a moral explosion. John and Rebecca retreated to the doorway, talking in tight whispers. Sarah tugged me back toward the truck. Will, she said gently, we need to regroup. We drove to a motel off the highway, a low L-shaped place that smells like old coffee and vacuumed carpet. I stood at the sink washing road grit from my hands until the water ran hot enough to sting. In the mirror, my face looked older than 47. It looked like a man who had been warned and was now very, very awake. I set my folder on the little round table and opened it like a general unfurling a battle map. Deed, probate, tax receipts. Uncle Ray's letters. I thought of his voice. Watch out for her, the one who smiles while she sharpens the knife. My hands stopped shaking. I picked up my phone and dialed Jennifer Miles. Jennifer, I said when she answered. It's William Brown. I need an emergency injunction. My house was stolen. She didn't ask if I was sure. Real professionals can hear truth as a frequency. Tell me everything, she said. So I did. By nightfall, an appointment was set for morning. By morning, we would start dragging sunlight across every shadow Addison had ever stepped into. I was done being polite, done being shocked. If Addison believed the rules didn't apply to her, I would introduce her to a set she couldn't ignore: evidence, statutes, and consequences. Out in the motel parking lot, a sodium lamp hummed. I called home to the past, to Uncle Ray's voice on a reel in my memory. Measure twice, Will. Cut once. I looked down at the forged curve of my name in that photocopied contract and decided where the cut would be. Straight through the lie. All the way to the bone. The next morning, I sat across from Jennifer Miles, a real estate attorney whose office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fury. Her hair was tied back, her glasses perched low, and the moment she saw the forged signature, she muttered, "Oh, they're good. Too good. This isn't a neighborhood squabble, Mr. Brown. This is criminal fraud." She pulled a yellow legal pad closer and began listing out steps faster than I could follow. First thing, we're filing an emergency injunction with the county court to freeze any transfer activity on the title. Next, we contact the recorder's office for the original deed log. And finally, we file a criminal complaint with the sheriff's department. I'll handle the civil side, you handle the paper trail. I nodded. Addison Young runs the Maple Ridge HOA. She claims the property was foreclosed for unpaid dues. Jennifer's pen froze mid-word. Foreclosed on a property that's not even part of their association. Exactly. She leaned back, eyes narrowing. Then it's worse than I thought. Their manufacturing authority. We spent the next 4 hours combing through documents. I provided copies of Uncle Ray's letters, the 1,965 deed, the 1,988 HOA rejection, and my probate records. Jennifer cross-referenced everything with the county's system. Then she looked up sharply. There it is, she said. Addison filed liens plural against your property last year. Claims for unpaid HOA fees dating back to 2010. I frowned. That's impossible. My uncle never joined. She fabricated the debt. The county system accepted the filings because they were notarized. I felt my stomach twist. By who? Jennifer zoomed in on the record. Mark A. Young. She clicked her tongue. Any relation. Her brother-in-law, I said quietly. She sat back, exhaling. Classic conflict of interest setup. He's the notary, she's the HOA president. They probably approved the foreclosure in one of their fake meetings, then sold it under the table. I rubbed my temples. So, what happens now? Now, she said, sliding the documents into a new folder labeled Fraud Maple Ridge, we start digging. And we don't stop until she's choking on her own paperwork. That night, back at the motel, Sarah sat cross-legged on the bed, scrolling through her phone. "You're not going to like this," she said. She handed me the screen. It was a Facebook group, Maple Ridge Neighbors Association. Addison's smiling face filled the profile picture under the caption, "Committed to protecting our community standards." The top post, written the day before, read, "Another neglected property restored to Maple Ridge pride. Thank you to our HOA board for ensuring safety, beauty, and compliance. The previous owner failed to maintain standards, but our team acted decisively for the greater good." The comments section was a war zone of emojis and congratulations. Only one voice dissented. "Didn't that belong to Mr. Brown's uncle?" That comment had been deleted. My pulse throbbed in my temples. She's turning the community against me before the truth even comes out. Sarah squeezed my hand. "Then you make them see the truth." The following afternoon, Jennifer called. "We got the injunction. The title's frozen. Nobody's touching that property until this is resolved." I almost smiled. "That's something." "It's more than something," she said. "It's the first crack in her fortress. But brace yourself, these people fight dirty." She wasn't wrong. The next morning, I woke up to an email from an address labeled Maple Ridge Legal Department. Notice of unpaid fees amount. Due $39,450, property 342 Maple Ridge Drive failure. To remit payment within 10 business days will result in legal escalation under HOA Code 7.3b. Jennifer laughed when I forwarded it. She's panicking. These aren't even real statutes. But the more we investigated, the uglier it became. Addison's HOA wasn't legally registered as a nonprofit corporation. Her bylaws were self-written, never filed with the state. In short, she was running a fake HOA out of her living room, and somehow people still paid her. We met with a local resident named Marilyn Cooper, who'd lived there for 20 years. Over coffee, at a diner, she shook her head. Addison came in 6 years ago, all smiles, said she'd modernize the neighborhood. Next thing we knew, she was fining people for mailboxes and lawn colors. My husband called her a dictator once she fined us for verbal hostility. Another neighbor, Gary Turner, said Addison claimed to be annexing nearby homes. She sent letters to anyone within half a mile. Half of us ignored her, half were scared she'd sue. Jennifer jotted notes furiously. "We'll need statements from everyone she's intimidated." As we walked out, I noticed Marilyn's hand tremble when she passed me her receipt. "If you're really going after her," she said, "don't stop halfway. She ruins people." A week later, we found her weakest point. Jennifer had subpoenaed the records of the Morrison sale, the family who'd unknowingly bought my home. The sale price was $385,000. Of that, $50,000 had been wired to a personal account under AY Property Consulting LLC, a shell company Addison owned. The rest went to her husband, Robert Young, a real estate agent with Maple Ridge Realty. "So the whole family's in on it," I said, gripping the table edge. Jennifer nodded grimly. "It's a family business of fraud. The more we traced, the worse it got." She'd done this before twice. One victim was an elderly widow, Mrs. Linda Chen, who'd lost her fully paid-off home in 2022 under unpaid HOA assessments. The other was Sergeant Daniel Lewis, a Marine deployed overseas whose property was auctioned while he was serving. Both had complained. Both had been silenced. But not this time. Jennifer arranged a meeting with the real Maple Ridge HOA board, the legitimate one representing the original subdivision south of the creek. When we presented the evidence, the board members looked horrified. Their president, Carolyn Hale, said, "We never authorized any of this. Addison runs that breakaway group by herself. We've been trying to get her to stop using our name." That was the moment everything clicked. Addison wasn't even a real HOA president. She was an impersonator running an unregistered association under a stolen name, fabricating debts, forging liens, and flipping properties for profit. Jennifer tapped her pen on the table. "We have her. But I want her in handcuffs, not just in court." The next evening, I drove back to Maple Ridge, parking across from the property that was still technically mine. The porch light was on. Through the window, I saw the Morrisons eating dinner around a table that used to be Uncle Ray's. I didn't blame them. They were victims too. A shadow moved across the street. Addison, walking her tiny white dog, spotted me and stopped. Well, well, she said, that smug smile back in place. Mr. Brown, still loitering, enjoying your walks, I asked. How's your brother-in-law Mark? The name hit her like a dart. Excuse me. Oh, I'm sure he'll explain soon enough. The notary who falsified your documents, he's talking. For a fraction of a second, her mask cracked. Then she regained composure. You're delusional. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You forged a sale, pocketed 50 grand, and pretended to be a legitimate HOA. You didn't just steal property, Addison, you stole peace of mind. But that ends now. She tilted her head, smiling coldly. You think you're some kind of hero. This neighborhood thrives because of me. I smiled back. Then let's see how it thrives without you. The following week was chaos. News trucks parked along Maple Ridge Drive. The local paper ran the headline, Fake HOA President Under Investigation for Real Estate Fraud. Reporters camped outside Addison's house. Residents gathered in small groups whispering. The facade was cracking and she knew it. That night she stormed into an emergency HOA meeting at the community center. Jennifer and I were already there, quietly sitting among the crowd. Addison took the floor, declaring, These lies are being spread by an angry man who doesn't understand the law. Everything I've done was legal and approved by this board. I stood. Then let's see the board vote, I said. Murmurs filled the room. Addison froze. Someone in the back shouted, We never voted for anything. Jennifer handed a folder to the county investigator waiting by the door. Funny, she said, because your minutes show signatures from people who moved away 5 years ago. Addison's face drained of color. The investigator approached her slowly. Mrs. Young, I think it's time you come with us. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Addison's voice cracked. You can't do this. I am the HOA. No, I said quietly as the officer took her arm. You're just another thief in heels. The room erupted in whispers, cameras flashing, and a strange silence afterward, the kind that follows when power finally collapses. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just exhaled, long and steady. Because it wasn't over yet, not until I had my house back. And now I had the evidence to take it all the way. The morning after Addison's arrest, I woke up to 27 missed calls. Neighbors, reporters, even the Morrisons, everyone wanted to know what would happen next. I didn't have answers yet. All I had were boxes of documents, 2 cups of cold motel coffee, and a burning determination not to let her slip through the cracks like so many before her. Jennifer called at 7:30 sharp. William, get dressed. We're going to the courthouse. She wasn't one for small talk. By the time we reached the county clerk's office, she'd already filed motions to preserve evidence from Addison's seized property. The key, she said, slamming her coffee down, is the money trail. If we can prove she profited personally from every sale, she won't just lose her HOA, she'll lose her freedom. And she was right. Addison's crimes weren't about bylaws or neighborhood disputes. They were about greed wrapped in paperwork. Over the next few days, Jennifer and her legal assistant, Renee Carter, built a war room in her office. Maps, sticky notes, flowcharts. Addison's name was in the center of it all, circled in red. From that circle branched a tangled web of names. Mark Young Notary, Robert Young, Realtor Husband, AY, Property Consulting, LLC, Maple Ridge Realty, and finally the victims. We started with Mrs. Linda Chen, a 74-year-old widow who had lost her home in 2022. She invited us into her tiny apartment, serving tea in mismatched cups. Her eyes were weary but steady. She said my husband had signed something years ago, Mrs. Chen recalled, that our property was under her jurisdiction. When I refused to pay her fake fines, she filed a lien. I didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. Jennifer asked, Did you get any notice of foreclosure? Oh yes, Mrs. Chen said bitterly. From a company I'd never heard of, AY Property Consulting. The next week, a for sale sign appeared on my lawn. Her voice cracked. That was the house my husband built with his own hands. I felt my throat tighten. Jennifer's hand paused over her notepad for a second, just enough to show it got to her too. Victim #2 was Sergeant Daniel Lewis, an active-duty Marine who'd returned from deployment to find strangers in his living room. We met him in uniform outside the courthouse. She sold my house while I was serving overseas, he said. Filed a fake HOA lien, declared me delinquent, then auctioned the property for pennies. I had power of attorney through my sister, but Addison told her it was invalid. His jaw tightened. I fought for my country, and this woman stole my home. You tell me how that makes sense. Jennifer nodded. It doesn't, but it's about to. Over the next week, we collected statements from 9 residents, all with eerily similar stories. Each had received threatening HOA letters. Each had been fined for absurd violations, and each had eventually been harassed into compliance or lost property outright. Then the breakthrough came from an unlikely source, Mark Young Addison's own brother-in-law. Jennifer received a call from his lawyer late one night. "He wants to talk," she told me. "He's scared." We met him in a small conference room at the district attorney's office. Mark was pale, trembling, his hands never still. "I didn't know how deep it would go," he said, voice shaking. She said it was just paper cleanup, helping her fix old title records. Then one day she handed me forged signatures and told me to stamp them. I refused at first, but he stopped staring at the table. She threatened to tell everyone I'd falsified documents for years, which I hadn't, not until her. Jennifer leaned forward. "So you notarized fake deeds, fake membership forms, and fake meeting minutes under her direction?" "Yes," he whispered. "She had me notarize a dead man's signature, your uncle's. I told her it was insane." She said, "The dead can't argue." The room went silent. Jennifer exchanged a look with the DA. "If you cooperate, Mark," she said, "we can recommend leniency. But you'll need to testify." He nodded, tears streaking down his face. "I'll do whatever it takes. She ruined my life, too." That was the day the case shifted from civil to criminal. While Jennifer prepared filings, the media lit up. Local headlines screamed HOA president accused of real estate fraud scheme. Maple Ridge residents outraged after fake liens exposed. Neighbors who once defended Addison now turned against her. The pressure mounted. Her once perfect suburban image cracked under the weight of truth. Then, out of nowhere, Addison resurfaced, not in person but through a press statement. It read, "These accusations are politically motivated lies orchestrated by disgruntled individuals. Every action taken under my leadership was legal and approved by our board, except there was no board. There was only Addison. Still, she wasn't done fighting. 2 days later, she filed a counterclaim against me for defamation and interference with HOA operations." Jennifer smirked when she read it. "Good. That means she's panicking. You don't countersue when you're innocent, you countersue when you're cornered." But Addison wasn't the only one losing ground. Robert Young, her husband, quietly vanished from the public eye. Jennifer's investigator, Tom Redding, tracked him to a rental property in a neighboring county. When confronted, Robert cracked under pressure. "I didn't know what she was doing at first," he claimed. "She told me it was all legitimate. But when I saw the wire transfers, I knew." "Where's the money now?" Jennifer asked. He looked down. "Gone. Cars, jewelry, vacations. She burned through it all. We subpoenaed bank records. They painted a staggering picture over $340, 0 inches fraudulent proceeds laundered through shell accounts over 3 years. Each deposit matched a sale Addison orchestrated, all under her HOA's non-existent authority. That's when the FBI stepped in. They'd been quietly monitoring a string of similar frauds across the state. Ours fit the pattern perfectly. Agent Rebecca Nolan, a woman with the composure of a loaded gun, arrived at Jennifer's office carrying a black briefcase. She flipped it open to reveal photos, charts, and emails. "Addison Young," she said, "has been under low-level observation for 18 months. We suspected she was misusing HOA authority, but this," she gestured to my evidence, "ties her to federal wire fraud. That's prison time." For the first time in months, I felt hope rise like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Still, I couldn't shake one thing: the Morrisons. They were good people who'd lost everything, trying to start a life in what they thought was a safe neighborhood. When I visited them, John answered the door looking exhausted. "Mr. Brown," he said, "we saw the news. We're so sorry for what happened." "I'm not here to blame you," I told him. "You're victims too." Rebecca came to the door. "We used our savings," she said quietly. "Our kids love this house, but if it's really yours—" "It is," I said gently. "But I promise I'll help you. You'll get your money back." She blinked back tears. "Thank you." That night, I sat in the motel parking lot, watching the lights of Maple Ridge flicker in the distance. It wasn't about property anymore. It was about principle. Addison had built her empire on intimidation lies, and the silence of good people too afraid to fight back. But the silence was gone now. Jennifer called as I watched the horizon. "The judge granted a preliminary injunction," she said. "Addison can't sell, transfer, or access any HOA or personal assets. And the FBI just froze her accounts." I smiled for the first time in weeks. "So it's finally turning." "Oh, it's more than turning," she said. "It's collapsing." The next morning, the local news ran footage of Addison's meltdown. She'd confronted reporters outside her home, screaming about conspiracies and betrayal. "I built this community," she shouted, her voice cracking as cameras flashed. "They should thank me." By noon, the police were back at her door with a new warrant, this time for embezzlement. As they led her away, neighbors lined the sidewalk. Some whispered, Some filmed. Most just stood in stunned silence. And from across the street I watched quietly as the woman who thought she owned everything finally realized she owned nothing. For the first time in months, the weight in my chest lifted. We weren't done yet, the criminal case was just beginning, but the tide had turned for good. And Addison Young was about to find out what happens when you build an empire on forged signatures and other people's pain. The arrest didn't end things, it just changed the battlefield. Addison Young was too proud to surrender quietly. Within a week of her being released on bail, she filed 4 separate lawsuits. One accusing me of defamation, one against Jennifer for malpractice, one claiming emotional distress, and another insisting the entire case was a politically motivated attack on community leadership. Jennifer's assistant dropped the stack of paperwork on her desk like a dead animal. "She's suing everyone with a pulse," Renee said. Jennifer barely looked up. "That's fine. You can't scare someone who already lives in courtrooms." But while Addison tried to weaponize paperwork, law enforcement was assembling an arsenal of evidence. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division officially opened a case. Agents descended on Maple Ridge with black SUVs collecting boxes from Addison's office, her home, even her car. The once pristine neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Homeowners peeked through curtains as evidence technicians walked out with armfuls of ledgers, laptops, and file boxes labeled AY Property Consulting. When the story hit national news, the tone shifted. The woman who once boasted about protecting the neighborhood was now the face of suburban corruption. A few days later, Jennifer and I met with Agent Rebecca Nolan and Assistant U.S. Attorney Paul Jensen in a federal building downtown. The conference room was cold, the kind of sterile gray that made truth feel clinical. Paul laid out a thick folder. "We've confirmed at least 6 fraudulent property transfers tied to Addison and her affiliates," he said. "But here's the kicker. She didn't just forge documents. She bribed a county clerk to slip them through." He flipped open a photo of Stanley Reese, a mid-level records officer at the registrar's office. "He's been taking cash under the table to process fake deeds without verification. We've got text messages, wire transfers, and surveillance footage of him meeting Robert Young Addison's husband behind the courthouse." My stomach twisted. So the county was compromised. For years, Paul said grimly. Addison knew exactly who to buy. Rebecca added, "The clerk's already confessed. He's flipping. That's going to bury her." Jennifer leaned forward. "So what's next? We're charging her with real estate fraud, wire fraud, forgery, conspiracy, and racketeering," Rebecca said. "That's federal prison time, 15 to 25 years if convicted." I let out a slow breath. Good. She deserves every second. But Addison wasn't going down without one last act of chaos. 3 days later, she vanished. Her attorney claimed she was on medical leave, but when investigators visited her house, they found suitcases missing, closets stripped, and her dog left behind. The news spread like wildfire. HOA fraud suspect flees town. Agent Nolan called me personally. "We're tracking her credit cards and license plate. She won't get far." And she didn't. 2 days later, TSA flagged her at the Denver International Airport attempting to board a flight to the Bahamas under her maiden name. She had $120 0 inches cash hidden in her luggage and 3 passports, hers, her husband's, and her daughter's. When federal agents surrounded her at the gate, she screamed at the cameras, "I'm the victim here, this is harassment." That video went viral overnight. The internet dubbed her the HOA Queen Gone Rogue. Memes flooded social media, Addison in a pink suit holding a for sale sign that read, "Yours, whether you like it or not." But behind the humor, real damage lingered. The next few weeks were a blur of hearings and discovery sessions. Jennifer worked non-stop, her office lights burning past midnight. She called it the most audacious HOA fraud case in the state's history. And then came another shock. The legitimate Maple Ridge HOA board, the one Addison had impersonated, filed bankruptcy. Every dollar of their account had been drained. Addison had used the real HOA's tax ID to open new bank accounts, funneled dues into her private accounts, and paid for her lavish life and $800 000 house, luxury cars, and designer clothes. She embezzled from everyone, Jennifer said, flipping through the accountant's report. Even her friends, even the people who defended her. The court granted restitution orders to all victims. But recovering the money was another story. Most of it was gone, spent hidden or laundered. I wasn't surprised. Addison never built anything. She just consumed. Meanwhile, her husband Robert Young had finally broken. He filed for divorce and immediately reached out to federal prosecutors offering full cooperation in exchange for immunity. In his sworn statement, he detailed everything: the fake shell companies, the staged meetings, even how Addison dictated emails for him to send to homeowners demanding payment. She called herself a visionary, he said on record. But she was just a thief in a business suit. During that time, the Morrison family, the couple who had unknowingly bought my house, faced their own nightmare. Their names were on a fraudulent deed, meaning they couldn't legally stay, but they'd also lost their savings. When I met John and Rebecca outside the courthouse, they looked defeated. "She ruined us," John said quietly. "We did everything right, and we still lost everything." I told him what I'd been thinking for weeks. "You won't lose everything. When this is over, I'll help you. We'll make it right." They stared at me, stunned. "William," Rebecca said, "you don't owe us anything." "Maybe not," I said, "but I owe Uncle Ray. And he wouldn't want me to win by destroying someone else." Jennifer smiled when I told her my plan later. "You have more decency than most people in this business," she said. Addison underestimated that. The criminal case accelerated like a train with no brakes. Every day brought new revelations: bank transfers, fake invoices, even an email Addison sent to Mark that read, "If they're too stupid to read the fine print that's on them." The public outrage was explosive. Former HOA members held community meetings demanding reform. Homeowners across the state shared horror stories of abusive HOAs. Legislators took notice. Senator Elaine McCarthy introduced a bill named the Homeowner Protection Act, directly inspired by our case. It would make it illegal for any HOA to file liens without verified judicial approval. For the first time, people were paying attention. Addison had wanted power, but she ended up sparking a movement against everything she stood for. Then came the final revelation: the real scale of her greed. Federal accountants traced her finances back 10 years. The total embezzled funds exceeded $1.2 million. She'd bought cars in cash, hidden jewelry in safety deposit boxes, and wired money through offshore accounts under fake vendor names. I sat in court as the prosecutor read the list of assets aloud. Every word felt like another nail in the coffin she built herself. When they brought her in for arraignment, she looked nothing like the polished woman I'd met months earlier. Her hair was gray at the roots, her hands trembled, and the pastel suits were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Still, her eyes burned with arrogance. She stared at me across the courtroom, lips curling into that same self-satisfied smile. The prosecutor spoke. "The government recommends denial of bail, Your Honor. The defendant attempted to flee the country, possesses fraudulent identification, and has shown no remorse." The judge nodded. "Bail denied. Defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial." As marshals led her away, she turned to glare at me. "You think you've won, Mr. Brown?" she hissed. "You just destroyed an entire community." I met her gaze and said quietly, "No, Addison, you destroyed it. I'm just cleaning up the mess." Outside, the air felt different, lighter somehow. Neighbors who once avoided me now nodded in quiet respect. Reporters shouted questions as Jennifer guided me through the crowd. "What happens next?" one of them asked. Jennifer glanced back with the faintest smile. "Next," she said, "we go to trial." That night, I stood outside the motel and looked toward Maple Ridge, where the porch lights of my uncle's old home glowed faintly in the distance. For months, I'd been chasing justice. Now it was finally catching up. But deep down, I knew the road wasn't over. Addison Young still had her day in court, and I planned to be there front row when the gavel dropped. Because this wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about principle, legacy, and proving that no one, not even a self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, is above the law. The morning of Addison Young's trial felt surreal. After nearly a year of depositions, subpoenas, and sleepless nights, everything came down to this. I stood on the courthouse steps, staring at the tall glass doors, the reflection of my own face flickering between nerves and grim satisfaction. It was strange seeing so many cameras lined up outside. The media had dubbed the case the HOA Empire fraud trial. Reporters whispered like it was a celebrity scandal. For once, it wasn't about gossip or pettiness, it was about justice. Inside the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Victims filled every row: retirees, veterans, young families, each of them carrying years of exhaustion and resentment. Jennifer sat beside me, her binder thick with evidence tabs and color-coded notes. She was calm, composed, terrifyingly focused. When Addison was brought in, the air changed. Gone was the polished suburban queen with the perfect hair and pastel blazers. In her place stood a hollowed-out woman in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs. Yet her eyes still carried that same spark of arrogance, the belief that she was untouchable. She scanned the room, spotted me, and smirked. That same condescending curl of the lips, the one she'd given me on my lawn months ago. The audacity almost made me laugh. The prosecution's case was brutal and methodical. Assistant U.S. Attorney Paul Jensen opened with a tone that was surgical in its precision. The defendant used fear manipulation and forged documents to steal homes from law-abiding citizens. She fabricated debts that never existed. She impersonated legitimate authority. She weaponized trust. He laid out exhibits, copies of fraudulent deeds, forged signatures, including mine and fake HOA meeting minutes, written entirely in Addison's handwriting. The jury watched silent but visibly disgusted. Next came the testimonies. Mrs. Linda Chen went first. She looked small at the witness stand, her frail hands clutching a tissue, but her voice was steady. She took the house my husband built, she said it was for the good of the neighborhood. When I begged her to stop, she told me I was being uncooperative and fined me for disrespect. Her words cracked halfway through. The prosecutor gave her time, and the jury leaned forward, hanging on every syllable. Then came Sergeant Daniel Lewis, the Marine who'd lost his home while deployed overseas. He testified in uniform, his ribbons glinting under the fluorescent lights. I got back from Afghanistan, and strangers were living in my house, he said. She told me I'd abandoned it. Said the HOA had a duty to protect property values. I fought in 2 wars, and that woman tried to convince me I didn't even own my home anymore. His jaw tightened. She's the only enemy I ever had to fight on American soil. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Even the judge's gavel couldn't hide the disgust on his face. When Mark Young, Addison's brother-in-law, took the stand, she finally lost her composure. He spoke quietly, head down. She told me to stamp fake deeds, said it was just a formality. I trusted her. Then she threatened me when I tried to stop. Threatened you, how the prosecutor asked. She said, your family. If you go down, I'll make sure you take the blame for all of it, Addison shouted from her seat. That's a lie. The judge banged his gavel. Miss Young, you will remain silent. But she couldn't. They're all liars. They're jealous of me. I built that community, Jennifer whispered. That outburst just cost her 3 jurors. When it was my turn to testify, I took a deep breath and stepped to the stand. Mr. Brown, the prosecutor began. Can you explain to the court how this began? I told them everything from the first time I met Addison by the mailbox to the day I found strangers moving into my uncle's house. I described the fake signatures, the police shrugging it off as a civil matter, the sleepless nights in a motel room trying to piece my life back together. Then I reached for the folder I'd carried for months, Uncle Ray's letters. The courtroom quieted. My uncle kept meticulous records, I said. He warned me about her years ago. In this letter dated 1988, he wrote, "There's a woman trying to force me into her association. Don't trust her. Keep every document, every receipt." I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. He knew what kind of person she was before anyone else did. He just didn't live long enough to see her fall. The prosecutor smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mr. Brown." As I stepped down, I caught Addison's glare. For the first time, I saw something behind it, not confidence, not anger, but fear. The defense, on the other hand, was pitiful. Her lawyer, a desperate man named Calvin Price, tried to paint Addison as a misunderstood leader who had made clerical errors. She was simply managing community affairs, he argued. She believed she had authority. These were honest mistakes, not crimes. Honest mistakes. The jury's expression said it all. Then came the nail in the coffin, Robert Young, her ex-husband, testifying for the prosecution. "She used me," he said flatly. "She used everyone. I handled the real estate side, but she controlled the documents. Every time I questioned her, she told me I was too small-minded to understand big vision. She said homeowners were sheep, and she was the shepherd." He turned toward her. "You destroyed your own family, Addison." She didn't look up. By the 5th day, the evidence was overwhelming. Emails, bank statements, fake vendor invoices, all showing Addison had pocketed over $1.2 million through her schemes. On the final day of testimony, the prosecutor displayed a photo of my uncle's house, the way it looked before all this began. "This," he said, "is what greed destroys. This is what arrogance costs. It's not just about money, it's about trust, history, and the quiet dignity of home." When he finished, you could hear people sniffling in the gallery. Even the bailiff looked moved. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty on all 27 counts." The room exhaled as one. Mrs. Chen wept softly. Sergeant Lewis bowed his head. I just sat there still, the weight of a year's worth of fight finally slipping from my shoulders. Addison didn't flinch. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, as if refusing to acknowledge reality. Judge Ramirez spoke with a gravity that filled every corner of the room. "Miss Young, you abused authority, violated public trust, and caused immeasurable harm to innocent people. You are hereby sentenced to 18 years in federal prison restitution in the amount of $1.2 million and forfeiture of all personal and business assets. The gavel struck like thunder. She turned to me one last time, lips trembling. You think you've won, Brown? I met her eyes. No, the truth did. But the victory wasn't clean. The Morrisons, the family who bought my house in good faith, were still in legal limbo. Even with Addison convicted, their title remained tangled in fraud. Jennifer sat across from me in her office, reviewing the papers. Legally, they own it through a voided deed, but morally it's yours. The court can't just erase their loss. So what do we do? I asked. She looked up. You buy it back, at full value. That way they recover their savings and the property returns to you the right way. I hesitated. That's almost $400,000. She shrugged. You'll get restitution from the case. And you'll sleep at night. She was right. A month later, I met the Morrisons in a quiet notary office downtown. We signed the papers, exchanged handshakes, and Rebecca cried when I handed her the check. You didn't have to do this, she whispered. I did, I said, because that house was never about money. The restitution fund was divided among the victims. Mrs. Chen used hers to move into a smaller home near her daughter. Sergeant Lewis bought back his property from foreclosure, the government covering his legal fees. As for Addison, she was transferred to FMC Carswell, a federal prison for white-collar offenders in Texas. Word spread that she spent her days working laundry duty far from her marble countertops and HOA clipboards. Justice had arrived, maybe not perfect, but real. Still, when I stood outside Uncle Ray's restored house months later, the wind carrying the smell of pine wood and soil, I realized something deeper. No victory could undo the damage she'd caused. But it could make sure no one else would ever suffer from her lies again. And that, I decided, was enough. 6 months after Addison Young's sentencing, the house on Maple Ridge finally felt like mine again. Not because the papers said so, not because the courts ruled in my favor, but because I could breathe inside it without feeling invaded. The day I moved back in, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No movers, no police, no arguments echoing through the walls. Just the creak of the old floorboards and the faint scent of pine sap that had somehow survived every storm. Sarah stood in the doorway with a smile that could rebuild cities. You sure you're ready for this? She asked. I was born ready, I said, though my voice cracked a little. I placed my hand against the wooden doorframe Uncle Ray built himself and whispered, We're home, old man. We spent the next few weeks restoring everything Addison had tried to erase. I repainted the porch railing the same dark oak stain. Uncle Ray repaired the creaky steps and reinstalled the weather vane that had been tossed aside during her so-called renovation phase. Ethan helped patch up the garage, while Lily planted new irises along the front walk, bright purple, just like the ones Addison had trampled under her fake for sale sign. Every nail I hammered felt like closure. Every brush stroke felt like defiance. But the house wasn't the only thing changing. The neighborhood itself was unrecognizable. The real Maple Ridge HOA had dissolved entirely and reformed, under new leadership, honest, transparent people who actually served the residents instead of controlling them. They held open meetings, published financial statements, and even invited me to speak at one of their first gatherings. At first I hesitated. Standing in front of 50 people in the same community where I'd been humiliated didn't sound appealing. But Jennifer convinced me. You're not speaking as a victim, she said. You're speaking as the guy who exposed the system, the one who didn't back down. So I went. When I stood before that crowd in the newly repainted community center, I saw familiar faces, people who had once looked away, unsure of what to believe. Now they watched me with something new in their eyes, respect. I'm not here to talk about revenge, I began. I'm here to talk about accountability. I told them about Uncle Ray, how he'd spent his life keeping records because he understood something most people didn't: paper is power. I explained how Addison manipulated that power, how easily people fall for confidence when it wears a smile. I told them that silence is what feeds corruption, not malice, not greed, just silence. When I finished, they stood up and clapped. Not out of pity, but solidarity. It was the first time I felt peace since this nightmare began. Soon after, the state legislature passed what the news called the Homeowner Protection Act, nicknamed informally by local reporters as Raymond's Law. It required all HOAs in the state to register annually with proof of bylaws, board elections, and independent financial audits. It also prohibited any HOA from filing liens or foreclosures without direct judicial review. Jennifer texted me a photo of the governor signing it. Your uncle just changed state law, she wrote. I laughed, though it came out watery. Uncle Ray would have grinned at that. Probably made a joke about finally beating bureaucracy with bureaucracy. Life moved forward slowly. but beautifully. The Morrison family, whose nightmare began in my driveway, found a new home a few miles away. John opened a small hardware store. He said he wanted to sell honest nails for once, and Rebecca started volunteering at the local food bank. They visited often, bringing cookies and stories about how their kids were settling into school. We became friends, not bound by guilt anymore, but by shared survival. Mrs. Chen sent me a letter one spring morning, written in delicate cursive. I walk past my new garden every day and think of the people who fought for me. I hope your home brings you peace. You brought it back to all of us. Sergeant Lewis called too. Got my place back, he said. Even painted the porch red. My wife hates it, but after what happened, I'm painting it however I damn please. We laughed like old friends. Addison, on the other hand, faded into obscurity. Now and then, Jennifer forwarded updates from federal records. Addison had been transferred to a minimum security prison in Texas, where she worked laundry duty and attended court-ordered therapy sessions. Her divorce from Robert finalized quietly. Her children refused to visit. Her assets were long gone, liquidated, seized, repurposed into restitution funds that rebuilt lives she'd broken. The woman who once demanded to be admired now folded bedsheets for 12 cents an hour. Some nights I wondered if she'd learned anything. Probably not. People like Addison don't learn. They rationalize. But that was no longer my concern. It was early summer when the last loose thread of the story tied itself off. While clearing out Uncle Ray's attic, I discovered a small tin box wedged behind a beam. Inside were old receipts, postcards, and a neatly folded letter addressed to me dated July 2017, a year before his death. The letter began, "Will, if you're reading this, it means the house is yours now. You've probably already met that woman down the street, Addison something. She's been trying to rope me into her little empire for years. She's clever, but she's careless. Keep records, keep copies, and never let anyone tell you what belongs to you. And if she ever comes after this land, don't fight angry, fight smart." I read that line 3 times. Fight smart. Uncle Ray had always been practical like that. No revenge, no shouting, just precision. It was his quiet kind of wisdom that got me through this entire mess. I placed the letter back in its envelope and sealed the box again, this time setting it in the study right beside his framed photo. I whispered, "You called it, old man. You saw it coming." By the time fall arrived, the house had fully come alive again. The wooden floors gleamed, the air smelled of cinnamon and varnish. Sarah hung family photos along the hallway, the 4 of us on the porch, Uncle Ray smiling from the old frame beside them. One evening I stood outside watching the sunset stretch across the lawn. The neighborhood was quiet, no HOA patrols, no gossip, no clipboard wars, just the hum of sprinklers and the rustle of leaves. Ethan came up beside me now, tall enough to rest his chin on my shoulder. "Dad," he said, "are we staying here for good this time?" I smiled. "Yeah, son, for good." He nodded, satisfied. Grandpa Ray would have liked that. I looked at him, the glow of the setting sun catching in his eyes, and felt something unshakable settle inside me, peace. In the months that followed, Jennifer and I worked together on homeowner education workshops across the state. We taught people how to read deeds, verify HOA legitimacy, and spot scams. What started as vengeance had become something bigger: prevention. People stopped me in grocery stores, at gas stations, at town halls. They didn't call me the guy who sued the HOA. They called me the guy who fought back. I didn't do it for fame or validation. I did it because Uncle Ray taught me that homes aren't just property, they're stories carved into wood and earth, the echo of the people who built them. The night before Christmas, Sarah and I stood on the porch under strings of golden lights. Snow dusted the roof, and the air smelled like pine and wood smoke. Across the street, the new HOA board president waved, carrying a casserole dish. The community finally felt like what it was supposed to be: neighbors, not overseers. As the first snowflakes drifted down, I whispered, "We made it, Ray. You were right all along." Sarah slipped her arm through mine. "What are you thinking about?" I smiled. "How something stolen can still be given back better than before." That night, as I turned off the porch light, I caught one last glimpse of the front yard, the same spot where Addison's SOLD sign once stood. Now, it was bare, except for the irises Lily had planted, blooming in winter's defiance. I realized then that revenge had never been the point. Justice wasn't about winning, it was about restoring balance. And maybe that's what Uncle Ray meant by fighting smart. Not loud, not cruel, just right. Home isn't just woodland and walls, it's the legacy of the people who built it with love and honesty. The moment someone tries to take that from you, you have 2 choices: walk away or stand your ground. But standing your ground doesn't always mean shouting or fighting. Sometimes it means documenting learning and outsmarting those who abuse power. Addison's story isn't rare. There are people like her in every system hiding behind authority to feed on fear. But the truth is louder than intimidation when you refuse to stay silent. My uncle's wisdom saved me. His record-keeping, his patience, his belief that the pen is mightier than the rulebook turned out to be prophetic. So if you're watching this and facing your own HOA nightmare, remember this fight: smart, not angry. Protect what's yours, honor those who came before, and never underestimate the power of one person standing up to corruption. Have you ever dealt with an HOA that went too far? Tell me in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories where truth, justice, and karma all come full circle.